Welcome back to Propology 101, and today we are going to be talking about the Empire Strikes Back Stunt E-11. Now, as far as production goes, this blaster falls right in line with some other blasters we've spoken about before. It falls right in line, especially with the Empire Strikes Back DH-17, and it also falls in line a little bit with the Empire Strikes Back DL-21, the Hoth Rebel Trooper blaster. There's a little bit of both of those in or on the Empire Strikes Back Stunt E-11. Now, you'll first see this blaster in the Echo Base scenes when the Stormtroopers attack Echo Base. You will see this blaster. Now, this blaster is used in that scene right alongside other Stormtroopers carrying the Hero E-11. You will also see this scene in pretty much every scene with Stormtroopers for the entire movie, especially on Cloud City. You'll see it a lot. Now, it is obviously, just like all the other E-11s, it's based on the Sterling submachine gun, but this particular version of the E-11 is a casting, and I'm not 100% sure if it's resin or fiberglass, but I would lean more towards fiberglass. All the other blasters, like the DH-17 and the DL-21, I'd found areas where I could identify that it was cast out of fiberglass. I haven't seen evidence, but if I had to, I would lean towards being fiberglass castings. That makes the most sense because everything else we've seen from Empire Strikes Back were fiberglass castings. Just about everything now that I think about it. So it's based on the E-11. It's a casting of a Sterling, and it has, just like the Hero, it uses the M19 scope. And last episode I didn't have an M19 scope available, but I have one out now. I just cast one for another project, but you can see the comparative size. But you can also see, if I line up the feet, you can see that their footprint is exactly the same. And the reason why, these scopes were all part of a system setting up a sight for a different piece of equipment during World War. These were from World War II. It required a different range setting, and this is how you change the range setting. Anyway, the scope mount for the Empire Strikes Back ESB Stunt is actually cast on the body of the blaster, very similar to how the Empire Strikes Back DH-17s were done. And the M19 scope that is on there is also a casting, not a real scope, but a casting of a real scope. I've talked about this in the past, but to reinforce the trigger on the casting of the blaster, they clay filled behind the trigger and the trigger guard. They also did the exact same thing. They clay filled underneath the sight rail or the scope rail. The scope rail, basically what I think they probably did is they had a kitted out Hero and just made a mold of that kitted out Hero and added clay behind the trigger to reinforce that area and make it easier to cast. And also they added clay underneath the scope rail to make that easier to cast and actually also give it more strength. And then I believe the scope is just glued on top, or maybe pinned. They drill in and possibly pin and glue the scopes on. All right, moving on to greeblies. The Empire Strikes Back Stunt E-11 has a lot of greeblies, and for the very first time up until this point, E-11s don't have very many greeblies, but this one does. The Empire Strikes Back Stunt E-11 has a greebly right on top of the scope rail, right in front of the M19 scope. And that part is actually a Sony cassette recorder button. You know, the buttons play, stop, record, all those. It's one of those buttons. It's been taken out, turned upside down, and then shaped really. It's been sanded and shaped. Now, that button comes from the Sony cassette recorder model number TC67. That's what is in front of the M19 scope on the scope mount. Now, in the rear of the scope mount, behind the M19 scope, is another greebly. We don't really know what that greebly is. It may be another part from that record player. We're not 100% sure what that part is. It may be just a found part, and we may never know what it is. Now, on the left side, right behind the magazine well, is also another part. I don't think we know the original source of this part, but we actually know where it's been used in Star Wars before. On the Empire Strikes Back, Boba Fett EE3, it used PVC pipe hangers. And those pipe hangers, the tops of them are like this. You needed something for the scope mount to bite to hold the scope on. So screwed to the top of the scope mounts on Boba Fett's EE3 were these little pieces that go forward and then bend down. That was bolted on, and then that allowed the scope to bite down on the scope mount, and that's how they were held on the EE3. That same part is sitting right here where the counterbox is. It would be right underneath where the counterbox is, attached to the body on the Empire Strikes Back Stunt E-11. And behind that are two rebar stands or clips. When you do concrete work, you put rebar in there to reinforce the concrete, and you need to space the rebar up off the ground so the concrete can flow underneath it. And how they do that is they've got these little, sometimes they're called chairs, other times they're just called spacers, but these little pieces that click onto the PVC pipe, or the rebar, I'm sorry, and it sits on top of those. Well, that's what these two greeblies in the rear of the E-11 are. Now, these were invented in the early 60s, and they go by the brand name of Plasclip. Plasclip. I've looked that up, and there is not the exact same style or version of this rebar clip available, but the company still exists, and they still make the same type of product today, but they do not make the version that's on the Empire Strikes Back E-11 anymore. I don't think it's available. I don't know where you can find them. There's probably some laying around somewhere, but they're no longer available for purchase. Now, on the right side of the E-11, right behind the ejection port, we have a funny shaped piece. It's kind of like a long triangular piece. And this is just a custom made greebly. It's probably just a piece of plastic cut and shaped and then glued onto the body. And this is very similar to something that was done on the DL-21 Hoth Rebel Trooper blaster pistol. They made a very similar part that fit on the left side, high up on the barrel or higher up on the body of the blaster. Now in the rear, we have 4 button type greeblies, 3 along the body in the back, and then 1 on the rear sight. And this is actually very reminiscent of the DH-17 ESB. There was very similar greeblies like this on that blaster, but they were on the left side. But anyway, finishing it up, 6 T-rails, just like the rest of them. Thank you for joining along and checking out what makes the Empire Strikes Back Stunt DL-44 what it is and what it was made of. Join us next time when we kind of finish Empire Strikes Back, because we've got a few E-11s we're going to talk about that really don't deserve or don't have enough to really talk about full episode, but we'll throw them all together and they'll make a full episode. See you then.